I'm David Wessel. I'm director of the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy at Brookings, and I'm very pleased to have the chance to talk today with Paul Tucker, former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, who's written a book on central banking called Unelected Power: The Quest for Legitimacy in Central Banking and the Regulatory State. So, Paul, there's a lot of criticism of the Federal Reserve, particularly since the great financial crisis and the Great Recession. And some people wonder, why should we have an independent central bank? Well, when you're asked that question, what do you tell them?
Because the simple answer is because it's very hard for elected politicians to keep a promise that inflation will be low and stable. And if you delegate it to an arm's length agency, we can trust that agency to achieve that because their professional and personal reputation is wrapped up in doing that and not doing anything else. They're not trying to win elections.
And do you think that the way we've set up the Federal Reserve in this country is optimal for preserving their independence but making them accountable to the elected representatives of the people?
I'd like to see more members of the FOMC and the Board of Governors testify regularly to Congress on their approach to monetary policy. And I guess I would, or the price stability is an objective in statute, as is maximum employment in the long run. But I guess I would rather that was fleshed out by politicians rather than the Fed. That's probably not realistic here, and so I think the Fed needs to bend over backwards to generate public debate and public understanding of what its approach to its mission is. Understanding is an absolute precondition for legitimacy.
So when you say understanding, you mean the law gives the Fed the responsibility to pursue price stability. The Fed has defined price stability in recent years as inflation of 2%, but they've never actually had a public hearing or sponsored a public televised debate or anything about whether that's the right objective.
That's exactly it. And I think it would have been better had they done so. Let me be clear. I think Chairman Bernanke did exactly the right thing at getting the Fed to articulate how it was interpreting its mandate. That hadn't really been done before, but I think it would have been even better had there been a healthy public debate around it.
So you were at the Bank of England for 33 years, during which time the Fed evolved quite a bit. So do you think they've moved in the right direction towards transparency and explaining things to the public and just not gone far enough?
Oh, compared with when I began, the change is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, we're now well away from a world of mystique and trust us, but there are still steps to be taken, probably particularly on the supervision of banks and regulation of banks.
Let's talk about that. So you say it's important to have an independent central bank, by which you mean one that's insulated from day-to-day political pressures when they're setting interest rates and pursuing monetary policy. Is it really important that that be true on financial regulation?
Yes, I think it is. I think if you go on particularly on banking regulation, if you go soft on the banks, if you relax your requirements, it's a very clever, subtle, technical way of stimulating a credit boom, and that always ends up, or nearly always ends up, badly. And it's hard for politicians to resist that temptation. And so you want to insulate that kind of policy from day-to-day politics as well. But you need the politicians to set a clear objective so that we as citizens can monitor whether they're trying to do what they've been told to do and whether they're succeeding in doing it.
So what would your message to the U.S. Congress be in this book, if you could boil it down to a tweet-sized message?
It would frame an objective for the lender of last resort. Determine how resilient you want the U.S. financial system as a whole to be. Stay out of the detail. That you can be more comfortable with the detail being filled in if you have set a clear objective.
So you think Congress should be more specific in what it wants the Fed to do and achieve?
More specific about the objective, less involved in the details of exactly how it's done.
I see.
What tends to happen in a number of fields here is that the objective is left vague, and then Congress feels compelled to get involved in more of the detail of how it's done. That seems to me to be the wrong way around. Our elected assemblies here, Congress, should make the big decisions. How resilient do you want the financial system, the banking system to be?
How would you specify an objective on the resiliency of the financial system?
I guess you could do it in terms of minimum capital requirements for banks and certain parts of the financial infrastructure.
Paul, you've talked about the responsibility of the central bank, and you've talked about the responsibility of members of Congress. What do you think the responsibility of ordinary citizens in a democracy is towards the Federal Reserve?
Well, I think it's the other way around. What's the responsibility of the Federal Reserve to ordinary citizens? And the Fed needs to get out around the country explaining what it's doing, not just through business groups, but directly to groups of citizens. And I think the Reserve Bank presidents around the country play a really important role in that. But I guess I'd like to see members of the Board of Governors get out around this big continent too.
So I guess you're not sympathetic to the view that, oh, this monetary policy, this regulatory policy is so complicated, ordinary people can't understand it, so we should just let the technocrats do it the way we let the surgeon operate in the operating room.
I'm not at all sympathetic to that, actually. I think while some of the details are very technical, the broad thrust can be explained. And if it can't be explained, there's something kind of odd going on. I mean, this comes back to congressional oversight. Congressional oversight are the intermediary between the Federal Reserve and other agencies and the public. But that shouldn't constrain the Federal Reserve from communicating directly with the public, trying to explain what they do in language that is comprehensible to regular citizens, regular people.
Paul Tucker, thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Thank you.